The snow was falling in soft, tired spirals over Windmere Village, a quiet corner of the Lake District where the Christmas lights glowed like faint memories in the mist. Richard Hayes, 52, adjusted the collar of his wool coat and kept walking along the frozen path that bordered the lake. His shoes crunched on the ice, measured, deliberate, like every step he had taken since he stopped believing life could still surprise him. He had once been the man behind the glass towers of London, a visionary architect celebrated in magazines, envied in boardrooms. But tonight he walked alone, miles away from the glitter he had built. His phone vibrated again. Another hollow Merry Christmas from someone who wanted a contract, not his company. He didn't bother replying. At the bend where the old boathouse sagged under years of wind, something in the whiteness caught his eye, a shadow, then movement. At first he thought it was rubbish left by the wind, but the bundle moved again, and a whisper broke the silence. "Please, don't hurt us." Richard froze. The voice was trembling, small, barely human under the howling wind. He stepped closer, and there, beneath a thin pink blanket, sat a little girl, no older than 7, clutching a smaller shape against her chest. Her shoes were soaked through, her lips pale, her eyes far too old for her face. "Good God," Richard whispered. "What are you doing out here?" The girl didn't answer. She only pulled the baby tighter and whispered again as if to the snow itself. "She hurts us when we cry." The words hit him harder than the cold ever could. He crouched, careful not to startle her, and saw it. A baby, barely breathing. Her tiny hands purple with cold, a faint bruise circling her neck. "What's your name?" he asked softly. "Lily," she said. "And this is Rosie." Richard swallowed hard. He couldn't remember the last time he'd heard his own voice tremble. "Lily, we're not staying out here. I'll take you somewhere safe, both of you." She hesitated, studying him through the falling snow. Then she nodded, slowly, as if trust itself was painful. He wrapped his coat around them, the weight of his world shifting with every heartbeat. When he lifted Lily and Rosie into his arms and started toward his car, a strange ache grew inside him, something he hadn't felt in decades, a flicker of warmth, a memory trying to surface. As the engine started and the headlights cut through the snow, Lily whispered one more sentence that made his hands tighten on the wheel. "Mommy said if anything happens, find Richard. He'll know what to do." The car swerved slightly. Richard's breath caught, because the name, his name, shouldn't have come from the lips of a child he'd never met. The cafe on the corner of Kendall High Street never closed, not even on Christmas Eve. Its yellow light spilled across the snow-dusted pavement, drawing Richard and the 2 children in like wanderers toward a hearth. Inside, the smell of burnt toast and coffee clung to the air. A tired waitress looked up, surprised to see a man in a tailored coat carrying a bundle of blankets. Without a word, she cleared the booth by the window. Richard sat opposite Lily, who still clutched baby Rosie, now swaddled in his coat. Steam rose from the mugs the waitress placed before them. Hot chocolate for Lily, warm milk for the baby, black coffee for him. For a while, the only sound was the hum of an old heater. Then Lily whispered, "Mommy liked tea with honey. She said sugar makes your heart tired." Richard's fingers tightened around his cup. "What was your mommy's name?" "Claire," she said. "Claire Moore." The name hit him like a ghost stepping out of the past. Claire Moore. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in 20 years. Outside, the snow blurred the street lamps into halos. Inside, time folded in on itself. He remembered a woman with paint on her hands, who used to tease him for drawing buildings that reached for the clouds, but forgot the people who would live inside them. She'd vanished from his life one spring morning, leaving only a letter he'd never dared to finish reading. Richard forced himself to focus. Self. Where's your home, Lily? With Aunt Margaret, she said, her voice turning small. She drinks the brown stuff and shouts. Rosie cries, and then she locks us in the cellar so the neighbors won't hear. He swallowed hard. The baby stirred, a faint whimper. Does anyone else know? Lily shook her head. Mommy told me not to trust grown-ups, except you. Richard stared at her, heart thudding in his throat. Me? She showed me a picture, Lily said and rummaged through the pocket of her torn cardigan. What she placed on the table made his breath catch. A faded photograph, edges curled, the ink almost gone. In it, a younger Richard stood beside Claire. Their arms looped, wind blowing her hair across her face. On the back, in Claire's looping handwriting, were 4 words that made the café seem to tilt. For the man who stayed. He hadn't stayed. He'd chosen London, ambition, silence. And now the past was sitting across from him, 7 years old, sipping hot chocolate with trembling hands. Lily looked up. You built big houses, didn't you? Yes, he said softly. Then maybe you can build us one that doesn't hurt. Her words landed like a promise and a wound all at once. Outside, the bells of St. Mary's rang midnight. Inside, Richard Hayes realized Christmas Eve had brought him not comfort, but a reckoning. The wind outside howled like an old grievance when Richard stepped back into the night, carrying the sleeping children. The cafe lights faded behind him as his car cut through the snow. The village roads were empty. Only the distant toll of midnight bells kept him company. He had no plan, only instinct and guilt. By the time he reached his estate on the outskirts of Ambleside, the world was wrapped in silence. The tall iron gates opened with a reluctant groan, as if questioning his sudden need for warmth. Inside, the house was vast, elegant and cold. Polished stone floors, untouched furniture, and not a single photo frame on display. He laid the baby in the guest room, near the fireplace he hadn't lit in years, then turned the thermostat higher than he ever had. Lily stood near the door, hesitant, her small fingers gripping the blanket. You live here? She whispered. For now, he said quietly. It's big, she murmured, but it sounds empty. He paused. She was right. The silence had always been his companion, one that never judged but also never comforted. He watched her trace a line across the frost on the window and realized she was drawing something. A house with 3 stick figures inside, one taller than the rest. Who's that? He asked softly. You, me and Rosie, she said simply. He felt something shift in his chest, a crack forming in the ice that had kept him safe all these years. He made them soup from whatever he found in the pantry. It tasted of salt and hesitation, but Lily ate it gratefully, her eyes closing at the warmth. When she finally drifted to sleep beside her sister, Richard sat by the fire and stared into the flames. He took out his phone. Dozens of messages blinked across the screen. His lawyer, his investors, the secretary reminding him of an important meeting. All irrelevant now. Then, a number he hadn't seen in decades. A contact he had buried in his mind. Claire Moore. Personal. He didn't remember saving it. He didn't even know why it appeared. But when he opened the old thread, there was one unsent draft. A message written by her years ago, never delivered. If I'm gone and you ever see her, you'll know. She has your eyes. Richard's heart stopped. He looked at Lily asleep under his coat, her eyelashes fluttering in the firelight. And for the first time, the resemblance was undeniable. He leaned back, hands trembling slightly, and whispered into the empty room, "Oh, Claire, what have you done?" Somewhere outside, the gate buzzer rang once, long, sharp, unexpected. Richard froze. No one should have been there at that hour. He rose slowly, heartbeat quickening, and moved toward the hallway. The security monitor flickered to life. A shadow stood beyond the gate, half hidden by the snowstorm. And then, through the crackle of the intercom, came a woman's voice. "You've got something that belongs to me." The wind screamed across the moor as Richard approached the intercom. Through the fogged screen, the figure at the gate took shape. A woman in a red coat, her face pale, her eyes sharp and wet with fury. "This is private property," he said, pressing the speaker. "Don't play noble with me," came the reply, slurred but cold. "Those girls are mine." Richard's pulse jumped. "Who are you?" "Their aunt," she hissed. "Margaret Moore, Claire's sister." He felt the name like a blade sliding beneath his ribs. "You shouldn't be here." "I have guardianship papers," she said, "signed by the council. You can't just take them." For a moment neither spoke. Only the wind filled the silence. Richard could hear Lily stir behind him. A small, frightened voice from the hallway. "Is she here?" He turned hard tight. "Go upstairs, Lily. Lock the door." Margaret's laugh crackled through the intercom. "You think you're some savior? You don't know what you're inviting into your house, Mr. Hayes." He ended the call and stood still, the snow clawing at the windows. In his mind, fragments collided. Claire's smile, the message on his phone, Lily's drawing by the window. Everything pointed to one truth: these girls didn't need another legal guardian. They needed safety. By morning, the storm had eased, but the tension hadn't. Richard called his lawyer in London, Andrew Collins, the only man he trusted. "I've taken in 2 minors," Richard began, his voice flat. "They were being abused. Then you need to inform social services immediately." "I did. But their legal guardian came for them last night, drunk, aggressive." There was a pause on the line. "You're in dangerous territory, Richard. Even with good intentions, this could turn against you." "I don't care," he said quietly. "One of them's barely a year old. The other..." She said my name before she even met me. Andrew sighed. "You think she's Claire's child?" "I don't think," Richard whispered. "I know." Later that afternoon, a police car appeared at the gate. 2 officers, polite but detached, asked questions in low tones. Richard showed them the bruises on the baby's neck, the state of the girl's clothes, the photos he'd taken for evidence. They nodded, murmured, "We'll file a report," and left. But the moment the siren faded, his phone rang again. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "You think you've won?" The voice was hoarse, furious. "You took my sister's children, and you'll pay for it. You're not their father." The line went dead. Richard stood in the hallway, staring at his reflection in the window. A man with ash-gray hair, haunted eyes, and a truth he hadn't yet dared to speak aloud. He wasn't sure whether the fear he felt was for himself or for what the world might do to those girls once it found them. Outside, the lake was still frozen, but a single crack spread across the ice like a warning. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. The kind of silence that comes before a storm you can't yet see. Lily and Rosie slept upstairs, their breathing steady, while Richard sat alone in his study, a single lamp burning over stacks of unopened boxes. He hadn't been down here in years. Dust covered the shelves like frost. Old blueprints, university notebooks, a few photographs from another life, all buried under the weight of his own avoidance. He was searching for proof, any proof that Claire had once written to him, that his memory of her wasn't just guilt rewriting history. Then he found it. An old wooden box scorched at one corner. The smell of smoke still faintly clung to it. It was from his London flat, the one that had caught fire the year after Claire left. He had assumed everything inside was destroyed. With trembling hands he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in brittle tissue, was a sealed envelope with his name in her handwriting. Richard. The moment he saw it, the years fell away. He sat down, broke the seal, and began to read. If this ever reaches you, it means I was too much of a coward to face what came after. You once told me that you build things to last, but people, you said, are never built that way. I think you were wrong. There's something of you that stayed, not in me, but in her. His heart stilled. Her name is Lily. She has your stubborn mouth and your habit of counting stars when you can't sleep. I didn't tell you because I didn't want her to grow up in your shadow. But if you ever find her, tell her I didn't mean to leave her without a father. I only wanted her to find the man I once believed you could be. The paper trembled in his hands, the words blurred. Claire's letter wasn't just confession, it was absolution and accusation in one. He closed his eyes and felt the years collapsing like sandcastles. Down the corridor, a faint sound broke through the silence. Tiny footsteps. Lily appeared at the doorway, clutching her blanket. "You're crying," she said softly. He wiped his face, forcing a smile. "Just something in my eye." She stepped closer, her voice almost a whisper. "I dreamed of Mummy. She said you'd find us." Richard's throat tightened. She was right. Lily hesitated, then reached into her pocket. "Mummy gave me this too." She pulled out a silver pendant, tarnished but unmistakable. Inside was a photo. Claire, laughing, and beside her, a much younger Richard, arm around her shoulders, carefree, unaware of what the years would take. The same photo he thought had burned in the fire. Richard closed his eyes. Fate, it seemed, had found its own way to deliver what he'd once destroyed. He took the pendant in his hand and for the first time in decades whispered her name like a prayer. Claire. But before the silence could settle again, the doorbell rang, sharp, insistent, and wrong. Through the window, flashing lights danced across the snow. Police. And standing behind them, arms folded, lips twisted in triumph. Margaret Moore. The courthouse in Carlisle stood grey and cold against the January sky, its pillars streaked with rain. Inside, the air smelled of wet wool and old judgment. Richard sat at the long oak table, his hands clasped tight enough to make his knuckles pale. On the opposite side sat Margaret Moore, wrapped in a heavy fur coat, her lips pressed into a line of righteous anger. Lily and Rosie were not there. By order of the social worker, they stayed at a foster center for the day. Still, their absence pressed on Richard's chest like a physical weight. The clerk's voice echoed through the room. "Case number 14B, custody hearing regarding minors Lily Moore and Rosalie Moore." The judge, a woman in her late 60s with silver hair and patient eyes, looked over her glasses at both sides. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "you are aware you have no legal guardianship over these children." "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "But I couldn't leave them in that house." Margaret's lawyer stood, papers in hand. "Your Honor, my client is the girl's only living relative. Mr. Hayes has no claim. He took them without consent, interfered with custody, and is..." Richard rose before the lawyer could finish. "Interfered? I found them half frozen in a park. The baby had bruises around her neck. The elder one hadn't eaten for days. I didn't interfere. I acted." The courtroom murmured. The judge raised a hand for silence. Margaret smirked, leaning forward. "You're a lonely old man trying to play hero. Claire never wanted you back in her life." Something in Richard snapped. "Claire trusted me more than you ever will understand." He reached into his folder and unfolded the letter, the one he'd found beneath the ashes. "Your Honor," he said quietly, handing it to the clerk. "This was written by the children's mother, Claire Moore. It explains everything." The courtroom fell silent as the judge read. Minutes passed. Finally she looked up. Her expression changed, softening slightly. "Miss Moore," she said to Margaret, "this letter describes years of neglect, not protection. I will order a formal investigation into your guardianship." Margaret's face turned pale. "That's forgery! He made that up." But Richard didn't look at her. He looked toward the door, half expecting to see a small pair of eyes watching him, waiting for the world to decide her fate. After what felt like a lifetime, the judge spoke again. "Until further notice, custody of Lily and Rosalie Moore is to remain temporarily under the care of Mr. Richard Hayes, pending full review." The gavel struck. Once, twice. The sound felt like a heartbeat. Outside, the rain had turned to sleet. Richard stepped onto the courthouse steps, his breath fogging the cold air. Andrew, his lawyer, touched his shoulder. "It's not over yet, but it's a start." Richard nodded slowly. "It's more than that," he said. "It's a second chance." The lake behind Richard's cottage thawed slowly, like a heart learning how to beat again. Winter had not yet gone, but its grip was weakening. It had been 3 weeks since the court hearing. Margaret had vanished from the village after her appeal was denied. The police found enough evidence of neglect in her house to make sure she would not get near the children again. Now, mornings began differently. Instead of the silence that used to hang in his home like fog, there were footsteps, light, uncertain ones. Padding down the stairs, followed by a soft giggle. Richard stood by the kitchen window pouring porridge into 2 small bowls. Lily sat at the table drawing with a red crayon. Rosie gurgled happily in her high chair, flinging a spoon onto the floor. "You're supposed to eat with it," Richard said, picking it up with mock seriousness. "She's learning," Lily replied with a grin. "You too." He chuckled, the sound unfamiliar even to himself. There were still awkward moments. Burnt toast, spilled milk, the confusion of nappies and bedtime stories. But they were real, human and alive. The walls of the house began to fill with drawings, suns, stick figures, little houses. And always a tall man with 2 smaller ones beside him. In the evenings they walked to the garden. Lily insisted on planting flowers by the fence. "Mummy said sunflowers look like they're smiling," she told him. He helped her dig a row, the soil cold but soft. "Then we'll plant them here," he said, "so she can see them when the sun rises." Lily paused. "From heaven?" Richard looked at her and nodded. "From wherever she is." That night, when both girls had fallen asleep under their star-patterned blanket, he sat by the fireplace, the flames casting slow shadows across the room. He thought about Claire, about the life he'd chosen over her, the years he'd wasted building towers that touched clouds but not hearts. He took a pen and began to write, not a blueprint this time, but a letter. "Dear Claire, I didn't stay then, but I'm staying now. Lily smiles like you did when the world was too heavy. Rosie laughs like you used to, without asking permission. You were right. I built walls instead of homes. But these girls, they are teaching me what a home feels like." When he finished, he folded the paper and placed it into the old wooden box beside her letter, side by side, past and present at peace at last. Outside, the moonlight lay quiet on the lake. And from upstairs came a sleepy voice, half dream, half memory. "Good night, Daddy." Richard closed his eyes. After years of silence, the word Daddy felt like forgiveness spoken aloud. Spring arrived almost shyly in the Lake District. The ice on the lake cracked and drifted apart, letting sunlight dance across the water for the first time in months. Birds returned, singing like they had been waiting for permission. In the cottage by the shore, Richard Hayes was kneeling in the garden beside Lily. Her hands were muddy, her hair loose, her cheeks warm with color. Rosie, sitting on a blanket nearby, clapped at every sound the birds made, delighted by a world that finally seemed kind. Careful with that one, Richard said, nodding at the small wooden stick in Lily's hand. You don't want to break the roots. I won't, she answered, pressing the earth around a tiny sunflower sprout. This one's Mummy's. He smiled. Then let's make sure it grows tall. Lily looked up at him. Do flowers ever stop growing? Only when they stop reaching for the light, he said. She thought about that for a moment, then nodded. A child's acceptance of a truth that adults take years to understand. By afternoon, the garden shimmered with small green beginnings. Richard sat on the porch, sipping tea from a chipped mug. The one Lily insisted was his now. The girls' laughter drifted through the open door. The world had shrunk into something smaller, simpler, and infinitely more valuable. Inside, the radio played quietly. The news anchor mentioned his name. Richard Hayes, former London architect, has withdrawn from all corporate work to start a foundation supporting abandoned children in Cumbria. He turned the volume down, smiling faintly. Some stories didn't need headlines. As the day faded, the three of them sat by the water. Rosie fell asleep first, curled up in Lily's lap. Lily leaned her head on Richard's shoulder. Do you think Mummy's proud? She whispered. I think she's smiling, he said. Maybe she's one of the stars now. The ones we count when we can't sleep. She looked up at the sky, and for a long time neither of them spoke. The lake shimmered quiet and endless, like memory itself. Then from the pocket of Richard's coat, his phone buzzed. A new message. He hesitated, then opened it. Mr. Hayes, the adoption papers for Rosie are ready to sign. He looked at the two sleeping girls, the light of dusk soft on their faces. He didn't reply right away. He just sat there, breathing in the scent of earth and spring and second chances. When he finally spoke, it was only to the wind. We are staying. The words were simple, but they carried everything. Loss, redemption, promise. The snow was gone. The house was full. And somewhere between memory and tomorrow, love had learned to stay.